Some marks are earned in war. Others choose you when no one is watching. The wind didn't howl on Kepri. 9. It screamed, a high metallic shriek that rattled the cracked visor of Ethan Cole's helmet as he pushed forward through knee-deep ash, his boots sinking with every step, his HUD flickering between static and failing telemetry. Oxygen at 43%. External temperature dropping past -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Not lethal yet. Just uncomfortable enough to remind him he wasn't supposed to be here. Not alone. Not this far beyond the extraction zone. But the signal had been there. Faint, irregular, buried under interference like a heartbeat trying to hide. And Ethan had followed it anyway, because that's what he did. Because leaving something out here, someone, never sat right with him. Not after everything. His breath fogging the inside of his visor as he crested a ridge of shattered black stone and saw her. Not clearly at first. Just a shape against the pale dust. Too still. Too deliberate to be debris. His suit tagging it as biological. Unknown species. Minimal movement detected. And something in his chest tightened. Not fear. Just that quiet pull that said stop walking past this one. Ethan slowed. One hand hovering near his sidearm, but not drawing it. His other hand already reaching for his med kit out of habit, because whatever she wasn't a threat right now. She was a problem, and problems were things you fixed if you could. 10 yards out the wind shifted and her form sharpened, tall even lying down, limbs angled. Wrong in a way that made his training kick in automatically. Assess, stabilize, prioritize. Her skin caught the dim light like glass-tinted deep ocean blue, faint luminescence pulsing beneath the surface in slow, uneven rhythms, not blood exactly, something more, structured. Her armor was fractured along one side, not shattered, just opened enough to expose where the glow was leaking through, and for a second Ethan hesitated, not because she was alien, but because she looked important, not in rank or insignia, but in the way everything around her seemed to pause, like the storm itself was deciding whether to touch her or not. His HUD chirped a warning, power at 31%. Decision time, move or leave, and Ethan exhaled slowly. Yeah, I know, he muttered to no one, already stepping closer, because leaving wasn't really an option he ever took, not when something was still breathing. 5 feet away her eyes opened, not wide, not panicked, just aware, sharp and steady despite everything, and they locked onto him with a focus that made his pulse hitch, golden, layered like there was more than one iris shifting beneath the surface, studying him, weighing him, and for a moment neither of them moved, the storm howling around them. The distance between human and alien measured in a few feet and 1,000 unknowns. Her hand twitched towards something at her side. A weapon maybe, but it stopped halfway, strength failing or choice changing. Ethan couldn't tell. Easy, he said, voice calm through the calm filter, not raising his weapon, not stepping back, just lowering himself slowly to one knee beside her, ash crunching under the weight. I'm not here to make this worse. Her gaze didn't soften, but it didn't harden either. Just held him there, searching for something he didn't know how to show. His glove hovered over the fracture in her armor, sensors already feeding him impossible readings, temperature spikes, energy signatures that didn't map to anything in his training. You're not going to like this, he added quietly, more out of habit than expectation, and then he reached in anyway, because sometimes the right thing didn't wait for permission. And somewhere deep beneath the noise of the storm and the failing systems, something else stirred, faint, ancient, and listening. The moment his glove made contact, the glow beneath her skin surged, not violently, but with a steady, deliberate intensity that felt almost aware. Ethan froze for half a second, instincts telling him to pull back, but training held him there, steady pressure, controlled breathing, his suit compensating for the sudden spike in thermal readings as numbers flickered across his visor in patterns that made no sense, not human, not mechanical, something in between. Okay, that is new, he murmured, under his breath, adjusting the med patch and pressing it into place along the fractured edge of her armor. The seal hissed softly as it adapted, forming around contours it was never designed to handle. And for a moment nothing happened, just the wind, just the cold, just two strangers caught in a silence that should not have felt this heavy. Then her breathing shifted, shallow at first, then deeper, more stable. The uneven pulses of light beneath her skin beginning to synchronize, like a rhythm finding its beat again. Ethan let out a slow breath he did not realize he had been holding. "There we go," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. But her eyes were still on him, sharper now, clearer, tracking every movement with a focus that felt almost surgical. "You interfere with what you do not understand," she said, her voice low but steady. The translator in his suit lagging half a second before resolving her words into something recognizable. The tone carried no accusation, just fact, and that somehow made it heavier. Ethan gave a small shrug, even though he knew she could barely see the gesture. "Yeah, I get that a lot," he replied, checking the patch again, watching the reading stabilize into something closer to normal, at least normal for her, whatever that meant. Her gaze flickered briefly to his hand, still resting against her side, and for the first time there was something else there, not hostility, not even curiosity exactly, something quieter, like she was measuring a variable she had not accounted for. "Your kind retreats from risk," she said, slower now, as if choosing each word with care, "yet you advance toward it." Ethan huffed softly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth beneath the helmet. "My kind also makes bad decisions," he said, easing his hand away as the patch locked into place, the glow beneath her skin dimming to a softer, more controlled light. His HUD chimed again. Power at 24%. Time was slipping whether he liked it or not, but leaving now felt wrong. Unfinished, he shifted his weight, sitting back slightly on his heels. "Can you stand?" he asked, practical, direct, because that was the next step, always the next step. Her expression did not change, but there was a pause, brief, almost imperceptible, before she moved, one arm pressing against the ground, testing strength, balance. The motion was controlled, precise, like every action had been calculated before it was attempted. She rose halfway, then steadied, the faint glow along her side holding, not flaring, not fading, stable. Ethan watched closely, ready to catch her if she faltered, though he had no idea if that would even help. She straightened fully a second later, taller than him even with the slight forward tilt of her posture, her presence shifting the space around them in a way his suit could not quantify. And for a moment they simply stood there, the storm curling around them, two figures that should have been enemies by every measurable standard. "You have altered an outcome," she said at last, her voice quieter now, less like a declaration and more like an observation. Ethan tilted his head slightly. "I patched you up," he replied, simple, grounded, because anything else felt like overthinking it. Her eyes held his again, and this time there was no distance in them, just a depth that made his chest tighten without warning. "No," she said softly. "You did more than that." And somewhere beneath his glove, along the skin of his forearm, there was a faint, unfamiliar warmth that had not been there before. The warmth did not fade. It spread, slow and deliberate beneath Ethan's skin like something mapping him from the inside out. He flexed his fingers instinctively, watching his glove as if he could see through it. "That is not normal," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. But the alien woman was already watching his arm, her focus sharper than before, almost reverent. The storm howled louder for a moment, a burst of ash sweeping between them, and when it cleared she had stepped closer. Without him noticing, not aggressive, not cautious, just certain, her presence now close enough that his suit registered a subtle shift in electromagnetic readings. "Remove the covering," she said, her voice low but carrying an authority that did not need volume. Ethan hesitated, not out of fear, but because nothing in his training manual covered this. Not glowing wounds, not unknown biological reactions, definitely not alien requests that sounded like commands wrapped in calm. "It is just a glove," he replied, buying time, but her gaze did not waver. "Remove it," she repeated, softer this time, but somehow harder to ignore. Ethan exhaled slowly and reached up, disengaging the seal at his wrist. The suit hissed as pressure adjusted, cold air biting immediately against his exposed skin as he pulled the glove free. The wind cut sharp across his fingers, but he barely felt it, because there it was, faint at first, then unmistakable, a pattern etched across his forearm, not burned, not cut, but formed, lines of soft light tracing geometric curves that seemed to shift when he tried to focus on them. like they were not meant to be understood all at once. You have got to be kidding me, he whispered, turning his arm slightly. The mark responded, pulsing once, in sync with something he could not hear but somehow felt. The alien woman lowered her head just a fraction, not submission, not quite, but recognition. It has begun, she said, almost to herself. Ethan looked up at her, confusion cutting through the calm he usually held on to in situations like this. What has begun? He asked, his voice steadier than he felt. She lifted her gaze again, and now there was no distance left in it, only certainty. The choosing, she replied, and the word seemed heavier than it should have been, like it carried history with it. Ethan let out a short breath, shaking his head slightly. No, that is not how this works, he said, almost laughing under his breath. I patched you up, that is it. I am not signing up for anything. But even as he said it, the mark pulsed again, brighter this time, and his suit reacted with a cascade of alerts it could not categorize. Energy source unknown, biological interface detected, parameters undefined. Ethan, he muttered, grounding himself by saying his own name. Something familiar in a moment that was not. You are tired, oxygen is low, you are seeing things. But the wind did not argue with him, the cold did not argue with him, and neither did the woman standing in front of him. Your species does not believe in such things, she said, not mocking, just stating a truth. Yet you act in ways that call them forth. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck with his free hand, the motion awkward without the glove. I act because someone needed help, he replied. Simple, direct, the only answer he trusted. Her eyes softened then, just slightly. The first real shift in her expression since he had found her. That is why it chose you, she said, and before he could respond, a low vibration rolled through the ground beneath them, subtle but unmistakable. His suit picked it up a second later. Seismic activity, incoming signatures at long range, multiple, organized, not random. Ethan's head snapped toward the horizon, shapes beginning to form through the storm, distant but closing. And when he glanced back at her, she was already watching them too, not with fear, but with something else entirely, something that made the mark on his arm pulse once more, brighter than before. The shapes on the horizon moved with precision, not drifting with the storm but cutting through it, deliberate and controlled. Ethan narrowed his eyes as his visor struggled to resolve them, silhouettes sharpening into tall armored figures advancing in formation, their outlines flickering with faint energy fields that bent the ash around them instead of letting it touch. His suit pinged again, multiple contacts, closing distance at a steady pace. No attempt to conceal, no sign of hesitation. Those are yours, Ethan asked, not taking his eyes off them, his voice low, measured, the kind of tone he used when things could go bad fast. The alien woman stood beside him, completely still, her posture no longer weakened, no longer recovering, but composed, aligned, as if something inside her had reset to its intended state. They are not mine, she said, and there was a subtle shift in her voice now, less strained, more anchored. They are what remains of a belief older than either of our species. Ethan blinked once, processing that, not the words themselves but the way she said them, like she was not explaining, just confirming something already decided. He glanced down at his arm again, the mark pulsing faintly under the cold air, responding not to his thoughts but to something external, something approaching. That belief is about to get real close, he muttered, shifting his stance slightly, instinct pulling him into readiness even if he did not raise a weapon, because raising a weapon right now felt like the wrong move in a situation that already made no sense. The figures grew clearer with every second, tall, each easily over 7 feet. Their armor smooth and reflective in places, matte in others, designed for function rather than intimidation, yet somehow achieving both. No visible insignia, no rank markings, just uniform presence. And as they drew within 50 yards, they slowed, not abruptly, but in perfect synchronization, stopping as one, the storm continuing to rage around them, but never quite touching them, as if it knew better. Ethan felt his pulse pick up despite himself. Not fear exactly, but awareness, the kind that comes when every variable is unknown and every outcome matters. He shifted his weight again, placing himself slightly between them and the woman without fully realizing he had done it. And she noticed, her gaze flicking to him for a fraction of a second, something unreadable passing through her eyes. "You would stand in front of me," she said quietly. Not a question. Ethan kept his focus forward, watching the figures. "I stand in front of whoever needs it," he replied. Simple, automatic. The kind of answer that did not come from thinking. And for a brief moment, the mark on his arm burned warmer, not painful, just present. The lead figure stepped forward then, one pace, measured, controlled, and raised a single hand, not in threat, not in greeting, just acknowledgement. The others remained perfectly still behind it. Ethan tensed slightly, every instinct telling him this was the moment something would happen. Something irreversible. But nothing came. No sudden movement. No escalation. Just silence, heavy and deliberate, stretching between two sides that should not have been standing this close without conflict. The alien woman beside him took one step forward, her movement calm, assured. And for the first time since he had found her, she did not look at the approaching figures with distance or detachment, but with recognition, not of individuals, but of purpose. "They feel it," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough for him to hear over the storm. Ethan swallowed once, eyes still fixed on the lead figure. "Feel what?" he asked, though part of him already knew the answer. The mark pulsed again, brighter this time, a soft glow reflecting faintly off the ash-covered ground, and the figure's raised hand lowered slowly, not as a command, but as a response. "You," she said, and this time, there was no uncertainty in her voice at all. The words settled heavier than the storm, and for the first time since stepping onto this planet, Ethan did not have an answer ready. His mind ran through possibilities, misinterpretation, translation error, some kind of biological signal his suit was misreading, but none of them held, because the figures ahead did not move like they were confused. They moved like they had found what they came for. The lead figure took another step forward, then another, slow, deliberate, closing the distance to within 20 yards. The rest followed in perfect silence, their formation tightening not in aggression, but in alignment. Ethan felt the urge to step back, not out of fear, but because something about this felt ceremonial, like he had walked into the middle of something that had already been decided long before he arrived. "I do not like this," he said under his breath, his free hand hovering near his sidearm again, not drawing it, just reminding himself it was there, something familiar in a moment that was not. Beside him, the alien woman did not move, her posture steady, her presence grounded in a way that made the chaos around them feel distant. "You are not in danger," she said, and the certainty in her voice should have been reassuring, but it only made him more aware of how little he understood. "You do not know that," Ethan replied, eyes still fixed on the approaching figures. "I do," she answered, and there was no arrogance in it, just knowledge, the kind that came from something deeper than experience. The lead figure stopped 10 yards away, close enough now that Ethan could see the subtle details in its armor, fine lines etched across the surface, not decorative, but intentional, patterns that echoed something he had seen before. He glanced down at his arm again, and the connection hit him like a quiet realization. The shapes were not identical, but they belonged to the same language, the same system. The mark on his skin pulsed again, brighter this time, and the figure responded, not with movement, but with stillness, a pause that felt like acknowledgement. Then, slowly, deliberately, it lowered itself, one knee touching the ash-covered ground, the motion precise, controlled, not forced. Behind it, the others followed, one after another, a wave of synchronized motion that spread through the formation until all of them were kneeling, heads slightly bowed, not in submission, but in recognition. Ethan blinked, once, then again, because this was not happening. It could not be happening. "No," he said quietly, almost shaking his head. "No, no, that is not." But the sentence did not finish, because there was nothing he could say that would change what he was seeing. The storm continued to rage, but it felt distant now, muted, like the world had narrowed to this single moment. He looked at the woman beside him, searching for something, explanation, confirmation, anything, and found only calm understanding in her gaze. "This is not for me," he said, his voice lower now, steadier. "I am not your leader. I am not your anything. She stepped forward then, closing the small distance between them, her eyes never leaving his. "You misunderstand," she said softly. "They do not kneel to power." Ethan's brow furrowed slightly, confusion cutting through the disbelief. "Then what are they doing?" he asked, and for the first time, she did not answer immediately, her gaze dropping briefly to the mark on his arm before lifting again, something almost like respect in her expression now. Something earned, not given. "They kneel to the one who chose without being asked," she said, and the words landed with a weight that made the air feel heavier. Ethan swallowed once, his grip tightening slightly at his side, because that was not something he knew how to carry, and the mark pulsed again, steady, present, as if reminding him that whether he understood it or not, something had already begun. The silence after the kneeling was not empty. It was full, dense with something Ethan could not name, something that pressed against his chest harder than the cold ever had. He shifted his weight again, uncomfortable in a way that had nothing to do with the environment, his instincts searching for the right response, and finding none, because there was no protocol for this. No training scenario where a group of unknown alien figures knelt in front of you like you had just passed a test you did not know you were taking. "You need to tell them to get up," he said quietly, his voice low, controlled, but carrying a strain he did not bother to hide. The woman beside him did not move, her gaze still on the kneeling figures. "They are not waiting for me," she replied, and that answer did not help. Ethan exhaled slowly, a faint cloud forming in the cold air as he glanced down at his arm again, the mark no longer flickering, no longer reacting in bursts, but steady now, like it had settled into place, like it belonged there. And that thought made something tighten in his chest. "This is not something I asked for," he said, more to himself than anyone else. But the words carried. The lead figure lifted its head slightly, just enough to meet his gaze, and for the first time, Ethan saw its eyes clearly, not glowing, not mechanical, but deep, reflective, holding a calm that mirrored the woman at his side. The figure raised its hand again, slower this time, palm open, not toward him, but toward the mark on his arm, and Ethan felt it, a subtle pull, not physical, not forceful, just acknowledgement, like a system recognizing a signal. "They see it," the woman said softly, stepping closer to him now, not in front, not behind, but beside, equal distance, and they respond. Ethan let out a short breath, shaking his head slightly. "To what exactly?" he asked. And this time there was a hint of frustration in his voice, not anger, just the weight of not understanding. She turned her head toward him, her expression no longer distant, no longer guarded, but open in a way it had not been before. "To intent," she said, and the word lingered between them, simple, but heavy. Ethan frowned slightly. "Intent does not do this," he replied, gesturing faintly toward the kneeling formation. "Intent does not make symbols appear out of nowhere." But even as he said it, the mark pulsed once, calm, steady, as if disagreeing without needing to argue. The lead figure lowered its hand again and then did something Ethan did not expect. It spoke, the sound low and resonant, not translated immediately, but carrying a cadence that felt structured, deliberate. His suit lagged, processing, then resolved the words into something he could understand. "Bearer of the unbidden mark." The translation came through, slightly distorted but clear enough. Ethan blinked, the phrase settling in his mind in a way he did not like. "That is not a title," he muttered under his breath, but the figure continued. "You acted where no obligation bound you. You gave where no return was promised." Ethan swallowed, because that was not how he thought about it. That was not how he framed his choices. He just acted, because it felt right, because it felt necessary, not because he expected anything from it. "That is called being human," he said, louder now, steadying himself with the truth he understood. The figure tilted its head slightly, not in disagreement, but in acknowledgement. Then, "Your kind carries what ours has forgotten," it replied, and the words landed with a quiet weight that made the storm feel distant again. Ethan stood there, caught between disbelief and something else he could not quite name, and beside him, the woman lowered her gaze for just a moment, not in submission, but in something closer to respect. "You do not see it yet," she said softly, "but you have already changed the outcome." And the mark on his arm pulsed once more, not brighter, not louder. Just present, as if agreeing with her in a way he was not ready to accept. The words settled into him slower this time, not because they were unclear, but because they were too clear, too direct, and they left no room for the version of reality Ethan had been holding on to. He shifted his stance again, the ash crunching softly beneath his boots as his eyes moved from the kneeling figures back to the horizon, searching for something familiar, something simple. But all he saw was the same storm, the same endless gray, and now this, something that did not belong to any system he understood. Changing an outcome was not the plan, he said quietly, his voice steady but lower now, more grounded. Getting her out of here alive was, he added, nodding slightly toward the woman beside him. And for the first time, the lead figure responded to something other than the mark, its gaze shifting briefly to her, then back to Ethan, as if reassessing the situation with new data. The one you preserved was not meant to be preserved, it said, the translation coming through smoother now, more aligned with his suit's processing. Ethan frowned slightly at that, a hint of resistance surfacing in his tone. Yeah, I am starting to see a pattern with that, he replied. You all keep saying things like that, like outcomes are fixed. He glanced at the woman beside him again. But she is standing right here, and there was something firm in that statement, something he was not willing to let go of. The woman did not react immediately, but when she did, it was not defensive. It was thoughtful, her gaze lowering briefly before lifting again. I was removed from the path, she said, not denying it, not softening it, just stating it, by design. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly at that. Not anger, just disagreement. Well, your design is not perfect, he said, and the words hung in the air longer than he expected, because this time, no one corrected him, no one challenged it. The kneeling figures remained still, the storm continued its endless motion, but something had shifted, subtle, almost invisible. The lead figure inclined its head slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement of a variable it had not fully accounted for. Your action introduced divergence, it said, and there was no resistance in its tone, only recognition. Ethan exhaled slowly, a faint smile touching his lips despite everything. That is one way to say it, he murmured, glancing down at the mark again. The lines now more defined, more stable, like they had finished forming. I just did what made sense, he added, almost quietly, and beside him, the woman's gaze softened again, not dramatically, just enough to be felt. What makes sense to you is not common, she said, and this time there was no distance in her voice at all, just clarity. Ethan looked up again, meeting the lead figure's gaze, something settling in him, not acceptance, not fully, but a kind of alignment. So what now? He asked, direct, because that was how he moved forward. Always the next step, the next decision. The lead figure did not answer immediately. Instead, it slowly rose from its kneeling position, the movement deliberate, controlled, and behind it, the others followed, standing in perfect synchronization, their formation shifting subtly, no longer centered on him alone, but encompassing both him and the woman, as if the equation had changed. Now, it said at last, the path must be redefined. Ethan let out a quiet breath, the weight of that statement settling into him as the mark on his arm pulsed once more, steady and calm. And for the first time, he did not try to ignore it, because whether he wanted it or not, he was already part of something that had no intention of letting him walk away unchanged. The wind shifted again, not weaker, not calmer, but different, like the storm itself had changed direction without warning. Ethan felt it before his suit registered it, a subtle pressure in the air, a quiet pull that did not come from gravity or motion, but from something else entirely, something that seemed to respond to the presence between him and the woman at his side. The formation ahead adjusted, not stepping forward, not retreating, but widening slightly, creating space as if anticipating movement that had not yet happened. Ethan noticed it immediately, his instincts catching the pattern even if his mind could not explain it. They are making room, he said quietly, more observation than question. The woman beside him nodded once, slow, deliberate. Not for you alone, she replied, and that was when he realized the shift was not centered on him anymore. It included her, both of them standing within a space that felt defined, like an unseen boundary had been drawn around them. The mark on his arm warmed again, not pulsing this time, but steady, almost guiding, and before he could question it, the ground beneath them responded, not breaking, not moving, but resonating. A low hum that traveled through his boots and up into his chest. His suit lit up with readings it could not categorize, energy patterns forming, aligning, and for the first time, Ethan did not try to fight it. He did not step back, did not reach for his weapon. He just stood there, watching, feeling, letting it happen, because somewhere between confusion and resistance, something else had taken hold, something quieter, something that said this moment mattered more than understanding it. The lead figure stepped forward again, but slower now, not approaching him directly, but moving into the space that had opened, its posture no longer rigid, no longer purely formal, but purposeful in a different way, as if the next action required precision beyond discipline. The path cannot remain as it was, it said, the translation clear, steady. It must be anchored. Ethan frowned slightly, the word catching his attention. Anchored to what? He asked, and the answer came not from the figure, but from the woman beside him, her voice softer than before, but carrying a depth that made it impossible to ignore. To choice, she said, and as the word settled, the mark on his arm flared once, brighter than it had since it first appeared, not painful, but undeniable, lines of light extending slightly beyond their original shape, as if reacting to something larger than itself. The figures did not react with alarm. They did not move at all, but their stillness changed, no longer passive, but attentive. Like witnesses to something unfolding exactly as expected, Ethan looked down at his arm again, then back up, his breath steady despite the storm, despite everything. I did not choose this, he said. But even as the words left his mouth, they felt incomplete. The woman turned to him fully now, her gaze meeting his with a clarity that cut through the noise of everything else. You chose me, she said, and there was no doubt in her voice, no hesitation, just truth. And that was enough. Ethan held her gaze for a moment, the weight of that simple statement settling deeper than anything the figures had said, because that, at least, he understood, not as a system, not as a belief, but as a moment, a decision made without thinking, without expectation, just because it felt right. The mark pulsed. Again, softer now, more stable, and the lead figure inclined its head slightly, not to command, not to confirm, but to acknowledge something that had already taken place. Then the anchor is set, it said, and the storm continued to rage around them. But for the first time since Ethan had arrived on this planet, it felt like something had finally stopped moving. For a long moment, nothing moved, not the figures, not the woman beside him, not even Ethan, as if the entire world had agreed to hold its breath. The storm still roared, but it no longer felt like noise. It felt like distance, like something happening far away from where he stood, and in that quiet center, the mark on his arm settled into a steady glow, no longer reacting, no longer searching, just existing. As if it had found what it needed, Ethan lowered his hand slowly, his gaze moving from the light on his skin to the horizon, then back to the figures. And for the first time since this began, he did not feel like he was outside of it. Looking in, he felt included, not by choice, not by understanding, but by the simple fact that he was already here, already part of whatever this had become. So this is it, he said quietly, not a question, not really, just a statement to ground himself. The lead figure inclined its head slightly. This is the beginning, it replied, and there was something different in its tone now, not authority, not distance, but something closer to respect, something earned rather than given. Ethan let out a slow breath, the cold air sharp in his lungs, his mind still searching for a way to simplify this, to reduce it to something manageable, but it did not come, because this was not something that fit into a system he knew. It was something else entirely, something built on choices that did not need permission. He glanced at the woman beside him, her posture steady, her presence calm in a way that matched the quiet he felt settling in his chest. What happens next? He asked, and this time there was no tension in the question, just honesty. She did not answer immediately, her gaze lifting slightly, past the figures, past the storm, as if looking at something beyond all of it, something only she could see. Then she looked back at him, and there was a softness there now, not weakness, not uncertainty, but understanding. "Now we walk the path you created," she said, and the words did not feel heavy this time. They felt simple, like they belonged. Ethan nodded once, slow, absorbing that, not fully understanding it, but no longer resisting it either. Because resisting something that had already happened felt pointless, the lead figure stepped back then, not retreating, but making space, and the others followed, their formation opening, no longer a barrier, no longer a line to be crossed, but a passage, a direction, and Ethan noticed it immediately, the way the space aligned, the way the storm seemed to bend just slightly along that path, like the world itself was acknowledging it. He looked at it, then back at the woman, and for a second, neither of them moved, because stepping forward meant accepting something he could not explain, but standing still meant pretending nothing had changed, and that was no longer true. The mark on his arm pulsed once more, soft, steady, not pushing him, just reminding him, and Ethan took a step, just one, into the space that had been made, the ash shifting beneath his boot, the air feeling different the moment he crossed that invisible line, and beside him, she moved too, matching his pace without hesitation, without question, and behind them, the figures remained still, watching, not as guards, not as rulers, but as witnesses, the storm continuing its endless motion around a path that had not existed before. And as Ethan walked forward into something he did not understand, he realized that for the first time. That did not matter, because he had not been chosen for knowing. He had been chosen for doing, and somewhere beyond the storm, beyond the horizon,